from the first session, and I think this one's really getting into some of the practical nature as well. So obviously we all have the fun and enjoyment of putting together a financial plan, and we thought it might be great to hear from a few people that are really getting their teeth stuck into it, and hopefully you can take some hints or tips out of that over this next little session. So today we've got three guys from us that have got senior roles in different councils. So Nathan Morcello, who's the Manager of Financial Strategy at the City of Greater Bendigo, also been on the FinPro executive since 2020 and heads up and chairs the North Central Regional Finance Group. So welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Bradley.
Adam Taylor's from Crangamite Shire, been there for the past 5 years as the Manager of Finance. Enjoys holidaying with the family and apparently a Cats fan. So not sure if you were lucky enough to score one of the 7,000 tickets, mate, and head down to the GMBHBA Stadium or whatever they're calling it these days. I know there's a few Cats supporters amongst us, and good luck tonight. And Ross McKean, who's the Treasurer for the City of Melbourne. So a bit of a newbie to local government, only starting there in March 2021, but over 30 years of sort of corporate treasury experience, so really significant experience, but learning and being put in the absolute deep end of putting a financial plan together. So I'm really interested in your insights, and good luck is all I can say.
Yes.
So each of the guys are going to give us sort of a quick update about what their process is and how they're going about it. And as I said, this is really about hearing from three different approaches, try and take the best bits out of the three, and hopefully help everyone out. So I am going to hand over to Nathan, who's going to crack on first, and over to you, mate.
Thanks, Bradley. I'll just do the usual clicking and mucking around for a sec just to get set up, and then I'll be ready to go.
Very pretty PowerPoint presentation.
As many councils may know, the comms department gets at the start of the process, but don't worry, the slide presentation goes down in terms of quality soon. Thanks for having us today. I just thought I'd start today with a question. What's our bigger financial plan challenge? Is it really accurate financial modelling, or is it telling the story and getting people on board and engaged, if you like, where changes are needed? And this was sort of a little bit of the thinking and why we sort of thought we'd come across this session today. Now we're online, so I can't get you all to raise your hands or sort of give me an amen or something, but obviously a bit of both are important, and I think the next few presentations might help play that out. So strap yourselves in for the next sort of 8 or 9 minutes, and we'll see how we go. There's a lot to pick up in our 10-year plan. It's got to pick up bits from the Local Government Act. There's principles like these strategic planning ones. We have to be integrated, got to address a new vision, got to touch on risks. And there's all those pesky financial planning principles and service planning principles that are now part of the Act that we've got to think about and bring into the next part of the process. And if you're anything like Bendigo, there's also a bevy of strategic plans and documents around. So there's the ones that have already had a heap of deliberative engagement on them. And this is even before we start actually going on the current council plan and long-term financial plan. And of course, if I talk to my neighbours in Mitchellshire or down the road at Mount Alex, there's probably 79 versions across all our councils of these at different levels. So how has Bendigo had a crack at this? Well, probably the mantra I'm trying to get across and trying to work to is to plan to communicate, and to try and communicate a bit of the story behind the numbers at a few different levels. So just to break that down and talk through where we're at for that, we were lucky enough to have a really strong Director of Health and Wellbeing who led a council plan project, Vicky Mason, but even before the most recent council was elected. So we've jumped into that as a project, and for the 10-year actual finance plan, we're on CT Management's Excel sort of solution for that. But we've also got a few feeder models into that I want to touch on briefly before getting into the rest of the how we engaged and sort of talked about this bit. So just quickly on that part, one part of engagement, I reckon, is getting and building it into the organisation to make others sign off and be accountable for those numbers, if you like. Now, we're nowhere near finished on this or getting it perfect, but this is where we're at currently. A couple of the key feeder models, your waste reserve, your asset management, your workforce, DCPs, we've not got a lot of that, but that's coming. So we've got a bit of that there. Obviously, a key part to this for others at a different level of maturity might be long-term service plans at the OPEX level and linking that in as well. So one part, sub-models, and getting other parts, other people to engage on that. I'll come back to that and again in a little bit. So how else? Oh, go back this way. As I said, plan to communicate and communicate the story behind the numbers. We've had a few goes at this over the last few years. So when I came into local government, I was lucky enough to have Karen Ellis as a director, and LTFP was sort of top of the list. Essentially pick a time early in the budget cycle and book yourself into each of the various levels of EMT, OLT, or your organisational managers and the key stakeholders. That's the obvious stuff, but you have to get out there. You have to be out there doing it. Our quarterly pack includes some of those key VARGO ratios and is a bit forward-looking. Again, long way to go. Not saying we've got it all right, but there's a couple of examples of people who do that well out there in the sector. And then when we got to this most recent round, we did do a different level of detail. So we had a stage one online at a high level that picked up our financial story. And I should have said at the start, all of these slides will be on later, so don't worry, and they've all got links in them to some of the stuff that I'm talking about, so you can grab this later or be ready for the next year's version. And credit to John Brockway, who's a Surf Coast, the team down there, who had the sort of our financial story bit. We used a little bit of that just to get started and then tailored it for ours. So we've got a simple, hopefully engaging, couple of page, easy to read version that sets out the challenge and asks the question, would you be happy to raise rates or change rates to continue to have this level of services? Just gets that high level out there and starts engaging on that. Then, like a lot of councils, I'm sure, we had community panels. We had 40 we had participants, a youth panel. We actually did the sort of citizens jury bit for a little bit. But as part of that, we were really clear on their second day, or one of the days, they did some dotmocracy, like what are the priorities and what do you think are the highest priorities out of that? And that was feedback for councillors to do the council plan. So kind of clear in that what their range of influence could be, if you like. So that was pretty important. We had Kapir helping, so we had some people that helped us sort of design how that looked. And now we're in the next bit, which is the actual writing it and getting it out for councillors, which is happening at the moment. And I'll talk about that in a sec. But there's a whole range in the community angle here, which others may touch on in deliberative engagement or participative democracy. And I think that's a future working group and something I look forward to hopefully chatting about at a conference later on this year. But at the end of the day, plan to communicate and then communicate the story behind the numbers. So how are we doing it with the council plan? Well, we're still aligning that. Councillors are going through priorities right now, and essentially for major change ones, we'll amend the model. But one nugget I wanted to put in there that we've found useful, I think is useful, is picked it up from a Newcastle model, but I'm sure others have done it in Victoria well. Be clear about council's role. For example, we can't afford something right now. The intent is that we're advocating for it. We might write a letter, but we won't commit to providing it necessarily. So just being clear about those layers actually helps sort of say what are the bigger ticket items in there that might actually need to be reflected in a financial plan. A couple of the challenges, don't want to make sure it doesn't always sound like it's sunshine and light. Capital's still a big one for us. Councillor staff aspirations continue to be too high, or in other words, difficulty saying no, or a very, very strong sort of not now. Sometimes we have challenges making this relevant below the whole of city level. So for a manager, what's in it for me? Why should I get involved in this? But that's where it leads to service levels and service planning in the future. So that's what we'll say is our next level, if you like, of maturity. Linking it strongly by services for what those changes in finance might mean per service level isn't something we've got to. We have service plans, but we don't have that linked in a really detailed way up and down. So I think that's our sector's next challenge, is to be able to engage on those service levels linked to finances. I'm really looking forward to other councils who may have had a real crack at this process this year. And again, it could be a good one to have a good chat about at the conference or for you to put your hand up and do one of these at a future sort of FinPro one. Just a quick note on assumptions underneath it. I know most of you will have this sorted, but there's a link in my preso for the CPI forecast that State Gov has in the budget. Don't forget about superannuation increases in future years. Otherwise, obviously, get in there and have a crack at some of those assumptions and how they work. And if in doubt, reach out to your neighbours if you're still kind of thinking with those and you're not quite sure where they're at. But I imagine a lot of people sort of already down that path, of course. Just to recap, really briefly, plan to communicate and try and get behind the story, behind the numbers. Suggest writing an engagement plan internally, like even if it's just a couple of dot points, doesn't have to be massive. You'll see some good pictures, I'm sure, of that in the next few prezos or around the place. Recommend getting somebody outside of finance to help write that financial story part. Every time you say waiver or underlying deficit ratio, you've lost the story already, of course. Get somebody else to do that or engage in that. Consider internal sign-offs with SMEs. So not just the ENT and the bureaucracy. Directors are really busy. Bradley, CEO, might get some of all of that, but make sure you're also going to SMEs and getting them to own some of the key bits of the model if you can get it to there. And then obviously plan for how that works over the next year. Like make a plan for that. That's probably enough from me, Bradley. I'll stop there and get this off my screen and look forward to hearing from the others. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for that, Nathan. And I'm surprised you haven't solved what an underlying surplus or deficit is to your 110,000 ratepayers. So I'm surprised you need to get that reworded.
Yeah.
Adam, we'll hear from you and the story of Corangamite.
Thank you. I'll just again get myself sorted. So probably not unlike the guys at Bendigo, where we've been through the long-term financial planning a little bit so far. So this is probably our third year of doing it. We thought we'd get a jump on it before it come legislated in the Act. So we've actually released a couple of long-term financial plans for the last 2 years. So we have started the process. We certainly haven't perfected it. And obviously it's a work in progress with the new model as well. My economic development team wouldn't be happy if I didn't mention that we would love some tourists down on the coast here. So if you've got nothing to do this weekend or in the future, duck down to the 12 Apostles. There's plenty of room for everybody down there at the moment. So overview of our process. So what we get, and this is probably the budget and the long-term financial process. We got all the managers to duck into Tech 1 and do their operational budgets in Technology 1. That starts sort of our base year and then building assumptions from there ongoing. Asset management plans are used to create sort of a detailed 4-year CapEx budget. So we have all of our out. That's all kept in a spreadsheet, and then years 5 to 10, a little bit less detailed, but driven from asset management plans as well. Some of those are placeholders for future years based upon previous spend, but a lot of that is driven through those asset management plans. So one of the things we're trying to do really well at the moment is get our asset management plans up to date and our strategic asset management plans from our systems. So from there, what happens is our operational budgets from Technology 1 and our CapEx budgets roll into a lead Excel worksheet. And from there, we can build assumptions and percentages or dollar values, which help build the budget and the long-term financial plan from there. We also build a number of scenarios through the long-term financial plan. So we have a best case, worst case, and we can track that on the fly with Council as well. So what we've done in the past is get that spreadsheet up in a live session and start charting, start making assumptions about what would happen if we didn't increase rates next year, what would happen if we went for a rate cap variation, what would happen if the state government didn't index our financial assistance grants again. So we can sort of do all that on the fly with Council in the room and sort of demonstrating how that affects the cash balance at the end of year 4 or at the end of year 10. So engagement for us, the new step we did this year is we went out for community engagement before the budget started. So we went out in November, December, asking the community what did they want from the budget, what's something that they'd like to see in it. And that's probably a different step for us in that then we have an opportunity to cost that up with the asset teams or really get a good price on that to see whether, and then give it to council before they start the budget process to see if they want to go ahead with that. Previously, probably like other councils, we've put up a draft budget in May and been hesitant to change it when it gets adopted in June. So getting that engagement prior to the budget process has been a really helpful step to us. We'd like to bring that forward a little bit, maybe bring it through to October, November, so that we get a really good chance to go through and make an estimate of those costs. And then it's about internally communicating with managers and councillors. And we have a really, well, I don't know if it's long-winded or not, but we sit down with councillors across probably 2 or 3 days going through the budget model and line-by-line CapEx projects before we do the model budget. Challenges for our long-term financial plan, capital delivery, probably our biggest challenge at the moment. There's obviously been a lot of government funding coming out, both state and federal government. Our capital delivery, the best we've ever done is about $16 or $17 million in a year. Our current capital budget is about $29 million for this financial year. So there'll be a large amount of carried forward to next year, and then a significant capital budget for that year as well. So that's giving us some issues, and potentially with extra government funding next year, it's really hard to deliver that in a short space of time. As I mentioned, good asset data. So getting our asset management plans up to date and getting good strategic asset data out of our strategic asset system. We use Ascetic. They've been really good. We use a bureau service where they help us get that data out of Ascetic. Obviously, the data you get out is only as good as the data you put in. So making sure that you're doing your condition-based assessments through the asset management team to ensure you get good asset data. The renewal gap, we have a really good focus on the renewal gap with our councillors. We try and make sure they understand that, and we try and make sure we hit our 100% renewal gap. It's not always been there, but it's certainly a focus of our long-term financial plan, is to make sure that we look after the asset that we've got before we start building new assets. And that's easy to say when you're an established council. It might not be such the case as if you're in a new or emerging or growing council. The other thing, as Nathan touched on, enterprise agreements or superannuation. So how do we balance this with attraction? I don't know about other councils, but we're having difficulty in attracting staff. How do we balance the cap with superannuation increases and an EA with pressures on long-term cash? Our other issues, we're probably not a growth council. In fact, we're seeing population decline. So how do we ensure that our rate base continues to grow forward? How do we ensure that we get people moving to our municipality? And then the other challenge we've got at the moment is investment returns. We've got a significant amount of cash sitting around in investments. Obviously, investment returns at the moment are really, really low. So what are we going to do there, and how are we going to replace that income? Because that's been a really big loss for us across not just this year, but the last few years. Making assumptions. So there's no need to create your own assumptions. The state government or the federal government already have a bunch of assumptions about CPI going forward. So we start with those. As I say, we build some scenarios of plus or minus percentages to see where we get to across the financial year or across future years. We come from a conservative point of view. So the council like us to be very conservative, and I think that would be across the sector. We also build in cash targets. So what do we want to see in the bank at the end of our 10 years or 4 years? We don't want to see ourselves with no money in year 10. So when we're setting our long-term financial plan, we set the council the challenge of, we want to have a working capital of $5 million at the end of year 10. How are we going to manage that across our projects and maintain our renewal gaps? Alignment with the council plan. So having a long-term financial plan was really beneficial to us before we started the council plan. So we sat down with the councillors before they started the council plan and gave them a really good outline of where we sit as an organisation across the 10 years. We look really healthy in cash across 1 year. That starts to dwindle out to year 10. So this sets the scene. So obviously that's where that long-term financial plan will really come in handy when you come into doing the next council plan. We also sit down and demonstrate the cumulative effect of the rate cap. It might seem obvious to us or finance people in the room, but having a 0% rate increase in 1 year really does hurt the council, not just year 1, but across year 10. And we can do that on the fly through our model. We also make sure that the council plan is fully funded and achievable. So much like Nathan, we don't have aspirational staff, and if we do have aspirational staff, it will be subject to government funding, or it will be about advocating for government funding, and that way we can tick off that if we've advocated but we're unsuccessful, or we'll stage it through the council plan. Just a couple of other things from me. We always come back to cash with the councillors. They understand cash. If we talk about cash in the bank, I think one thing the financial fraternity's done is it's made the income statement really hard to read. So we always come back to just the cash because they understand that and they can see that. And a strong focus on the VARGO indicators. So not just in one particular year, but making sure those VARGO indicators are a mix of green and orange across the years. We don't like to see red. And then having good asset management plans and good asset data is really important for us across that long-term financial plan, and certainly probably where we're going to spend our time focusing over the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years is making sure that our asset data is really good. So that's it from me in a nutshell. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Adam, and I think you're right, cash is king. So great to have that insight. Just interested, you did that sort of pre-council plan community engagement. Did you have any particular themes come through from the financial component, or was it projects and services based?
A lot of projects and services based. It was a lot of, we want our road sealed, we want a footpath, that sort of stuff. But it does give us an opportunity then to cost that up to get it to council before that budget process. So yeah, probably not a lot of feedback on the financial health of the organisation, more about projects.
No, appreciate that. Well, from a couple that have been in the sector for a little while to someone very new. So over to you, Ross. Yeah, interested to see your thoughts.
And no, thank you. And gee, I'm glad that Nathan and Adam went before me, because all of a sudden I realised that I'm not on my own in how we're actually contemplating this. Now, I will apologise up front. I haven't put together a PowerPoint presentation, but a lot of the themes that I was going to talk about do follow on from Nathan and Adam. I think the biggest thing that struck me when I came into the organisation was that, apart from having to grasp what is happening within council in itself, is that the 10-year financial plan loomed very quickly, and in my mind it was, well, how do we actually get people to focus on years 5 to 10 in this current environment where I think everybody's struggling what's going to happen within the next year, let alone years 5 to 10. And I think that is still a common theme from that point of view. How do we, I suppose, in the outer years, assume what is the assumption that we should take out there as what is the new normal? And I think, we get a lot of publicity, as people would know, and there's been a lot of focus on how foot traffic in the CBD is very low, and there's been a lot of incentives to try and get that up and running again. But that in some ways muddies the waters for us, because it does mean that those first 4 years do not look like they would have in previous 4 years, and we then need to try and look out past that. Now, having said that, we put in the structures around being able to measure all this. So we've put in together a model that can project out to 10 years. It's just a matter of how do we actually apply that. So obviously, the same as everyone else, we've gone through our budget and council plan workings from that point of view. It's been out for public viewing. Then it's a case of how do we take that and expand it without moving away from it too greatly. We put in place a number of, we put in one new policy and updated quite a number of our policies to take into account the new legislation that came through in the LGA 2020. So we there's a number of targets where in the 10-year area where we start to hit back to where we would be, but in the very early years, for instance, around our underlying surplus and deficit, where we're actually spending to get things back moving, and so we're going to be negative, and we have been from that point of view. It's about how do we actually recover from that. We had the same aspect of rates and how do we, we had an election last year with a new council coming on who wanted to freeze rates. We've done that, but that does have a cumulative effect going forward, especially in the latter years of the 10-year financial plan. It is going to be, one of the other aspects that we have done is that we separated our community engagement for the 10-year financial plan from the community vision and other items, which has created a little bit of a challenge in itself, because we are now going to a community engagement, which is almost solely on the 10-year financial plan, which then poses, well, what are we actually engaging the community with around that, and what outcomes are we looking at it, seeing as we've already set the budgets for this year from that point of view. Apart from all of that I just mentioned, I don't think there's any other themes that haven't been touched on from Nathan or Adam, and in the interest of time, I might hand it back so that people can actually ask pointed questions from that point of view.
No problems at all. Thanks for that, Ross. And yeah, if people have got some questions for our panel, please put them in the chat box and I can help out there. I think you all touched on it at some stage. Are you using the VARGO indicators as a key sort of way of explaining to council the impact of the 10 years, or are you using some sort of different other ratios? Anyone want to jump into that one?
Yeah, I will. We do use it as an indicator and parameters that we need to set ourselves to make sure that we've got long-term viability around that. The difficulty is, exactly how you actually. So we've got measures put in place that we should be aiming to. Obviously, what we found was that in the first couple of years that we are, to use Adam's. He mentioned it, we're in the red on a couple of those indicators, but it's over the 10 years we're within those indicators. But yes, definitely we use that as the parameters of what we should be aiming for.
We use them, but we use them after we look at cash. So and probably the one that's red for us will be the underlying surplus, and that'll be the case for a number of them. We have a $46 million a year depreciation charge every year. We allocate somewhere between 32 and 36 to renewal every year. So there's no way we're there. We also have a massive thing called the Bendigo Creek that's a drain that's been signed over from state government that runs right the way through the centre of Bendigo. That's our responsibility to fix up. But we continue to engage with state about who's actually going to pay for. So there's a whole lot underneath those numbers in different councils that the ratios won't necessarily pick up and tell the full story of, if you like. So, and I know other councils will have that about underlying deficit as well. It also only picks up some bits of your upstairs P&L. So, and of course, helpfully, the underlying deficit bit, not such a big deal for the 10-year financial plan, but your LGPRF sheet can be slightly different to your other sheet, which will be slightly different to the CT management model. So you just got to be careful about that as you go through it. That's just a few thoughts on the VARGO ratio. But do we use them? Yes. Are they in our quarterly reports? Yes. We absolutely be front up about it, but don't get caught on it if you're actually cash positive over the next few years as well. Yeah. Adam sounded like he had a bit of a crack with those as well.
Yeah, so certainly ours, whilst I say we don't like to be red, our underlying net result obviously sits in the red. And it's about telling the story with council is that just means we are heavily reliant on government funding. And we are as a council, there's no doubt about that. If you take away our government funding, we probably would fail very quickly. So it's about telling that story and what it means. So red, not necessarily a bad thing if you can explain it. But yeah, that's about telling that story with those financials as well.
And interested from you put your draft plan together and take it to council. Have any of you thought about what's your sort of comm strategy with going out to the community? Are you going out to the community, sort of the old Section 223 process, or how you plan to sort of go about that once you've got the numbers together, Ross?
Yes, the short answer is yes, we are. So the difficulty with something like this is what is going to be the format of that, and we're looking for a very targeted approach. We're not going to go through a whole raft of number of different engagements, and that is more because a lot of what we're doing for our 10-year financial plan does come from our community vision, our budgets, etc. It's an extension of those elements. So even though it's legislated that we need to do community engagement and need to be transparent about it. So we're just going to make sure that how we approach it does suit what we're actually doing, and from that I mean it's got to be commensurate with what we're doing, not an engagement in itself.
I might jump in briefly. We're certainly doing a 223 type thing towards the end of the whole council plan, financial plan element, if you like, but that's the end of a longer deliberative engagement process, if you like. So that's just to put the capstone on it and say, yep, we have, we're almost circle. I think somebody else, a colleague said the other day, it's the circling back. That's the end of your engagement process, and it just kind of captures the end product, if you like, puts it out once more, have your final say. Along the way, and I sort of said it in my prezzo, people don't want to talk about, are we really consulting on borrowings and what level, like with the community? We can do that a little bit, but what people want to talk about is service levels in a whole lot of level detail. So that doesn't happen in it's almost finished Section 223 process. So we're trying to walk the line of being clear about what we can and aren't engaging with at sort of different steps along the way. And that's what we'll have to message, because at this point, we've had community engagement, we've done stuff on the web, councillors have heard that, they put it in a plan, now it's got to be integrated, and that's a piece. So there's councillors in the mix by this stage, I guess is what I'm saying, and that means we're not totally open to everything that might come from the community in the last step of the process. That's our approach at this stage. But we've got a few months before we get there for that final bit, so we're probably still working on it. It'll be the final thing to say as well.
And Adam, given you did some of that consultation at the pre-Christmas, are you going similar, or just going to be more take the council and it's adopted type process?
Probably more informative step on the long-term financial plan. Ideally, we would have liked to have had the long-term financial plan and the budget go out in June. And that way you can sort of do both together. Obviously, that didn't happen this year with the changes to the Local Government Act and all those other things that happened during the last 12 months. So we're likely to take that out a little bit later, but I think it would be more of an information stage and, asking for feedback on not specifically projects, but they are happy with the financial plan, financial health of the organisation of the Corangamite. But yeah, probably more informative.
And I'm interested, are you using those sort of subset of data, particularly your asset management strategies, service demands and saying that's what we need to deliver and we've got to fund to that? Or are you sort of going the other way and saying, well, we need to make the financial plan look green and look affordable, and at some stage that'll mean we have to drop dollars and cents out of projects and bits into places. So yeah, interested which way you're going around there. Maybe start with you, Adam.
So we're probably fortunate that we have got our renewal gap funded, or mostly funded, through the full 10 years. But it does put a significant draw on our cash by the end of year 10. So it would be, and we don't have a lot of new projects. We're a fairly established council with not a lot of growth. So it's quite a different challenge to some of the other councils is we're trying to maintain what we've got rather than build new assets. So yeah, we do have that fortunate part where we can afford that. I'm not sure how you go the other way is if you couldn't afford all the renewal, how that works, whether you put it all in or whether you focus on those more important things. But I guess that comes back to your strategic asset management plans.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it does. We can't fund all of our renewal gap as it stands, as I sort of said before, and that means you've got to go and advocate for a change. What we haven't gone and done is said there'll be at this stage in the draft, I'm still engaging with councillors, but we haven't said in year 5, we're going to up the rates by this to fund that renewal gap, because rates is only one part of the story in a regional city. And so in terms of even maintaining sometimes those core assets, it's not that we're not the only player necessarily on some of those DELP assets, particularly in our region, particularly in the country. So there's a few bits to that. Does that answer your question? That's a little bit about, but essentially we are putting forward what we can afford. That it is an affordable, and I think the financial management principles make it pretty clear. That's one of the things you've got to take into account. How you get it integrated once you actually publish an asset plan next year is the challenge for later this year and early next year as well.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. If your asset plans say you need to deliver, pick a number, $100 million, but your financials say you can only afford 85, are you going with the 85 and work the assets out later, or going, well, we've got a big issue now, we've got to make some decisions? So I think that's probably where majority of people are probably making the financials balance. Yep. But is it a true reflection of what we're saying from all that subset of data?
I think the plan can call out when you're going to have that conversation. Like this is first time through the gate for a lot of people sometimes. So it might be that next year or in this term of council, there's going to be a conversation which says when. I don't think you have to try and solve it all in one go, but I agree, Bradley. A lot of people are just going to balance it out and do a model after year 1.
Yeah, my take on that is that that's exactly right. There at some point in time, you try and get it as accurate as you can for the 4-year council plan, and you cover off on exactly how you're going to fund all of that from that point of view. It's getting out in the latter years is going to be the tricky issue. Is okay, at what point in time do you need to start looking at how we're going to get ourselves back to where we were previously? So that's going to be a real challenge from our point of view, of course.
And are you finding your councillors are engaged around years 5 to 10, or are they just worried about the next 3 years in their term?
I'll jump in quickly if you like. Look, we've got 5 new councillors this time, so their heads are well, already. So that the timing of this has been tricky. So I just put that as a caveat. But look, generally, councillors are pretty engaged in the long term. And seeing the community panel members talk about what might it look like in 10 years, or for our kids type engagement stuff that we did in our stage 1, that really pulls at the heartstrings of what do you want the future of Bendigo to be. So the councillors are quite engaged on that, and you just got to bring that into the story of those out years. Are they really keen on the year 8 of the renewal gap and exactly engaged in that? Well, no, but maybe that's not entirely their job to be right in the weeds. But yes, in terms of generally being up for a longer term conversation, we've been pretty lucky like that. I don't know how it goes in other places where there's factions or Liberals and Labors and other things going on. We don't have that here, but for us, that they're quite up for the longer term conversation. Normally, most of them actually get it in that regard. We'll see when the rubber hits the road and the adoption of my budget next week. But at this stage, so far so good engagement on that front.
I would say that for the City of Melbourne, it's a little bit the opposite, only because that there is an absolute focus on what is happening at the moment. So that's not to say that they're not interested in years 5 to 10, but there obviously is a greater focus on, okay, what's going to happen in the next 12 months out to 4 years, probably even what's going to happen in the second half of this year at this point in time. So they're very, very focused on the now. And it's probably a little bit remiss to say we'll worry about the 5 to 10 years later, but there would be a sense of that let's deal with what we have on our plate now, and we'll renew our focus on what's happening later.
been able to have good conversations about services, or does it keep coming back to projects and the capital works, or been able to sort of have those conversations with councillors during the process? Maybe Adam?
Yeah, so it's certainly discussing services as we go along. We're probably not in a position where we need to look to be cutting any services or cutting anything out of the budget. We can afford to continue, or the long-term financial plan says we can afford to continue as we stay with all of our services if they remain the same. But obviously that's not going to be the case. So I probably haven't got into looking at changing services as yet. So that fortunate position. And as far as years 5 to 10, councillors, you get a bit of a glassy look when you start talking about years 5 to 10. But that's where we just focus on the cash. So ensuring, so they don't need to know the detail of it. They just need to know that by year 10, we're not bankrupt. So it's probably more just looking at those numbers at the end of year 10 to ensure that we can afford it.
Just make one comment on the services bit, that the only time I've seen it work for engagement on the services bit isn't on a big budget model, whole of citywide. What do you think about all our services? It's been in those community panels when you get people in defined spaces where you give them a bit of a run up. This is how things work, and you engage them a little bit more. That's where the services bit, I think, and that's where I think the future of our bits will be. Not full citizens jury necessarily, but we've certainly kept the numbers and contacts of the 42 people we engaged with, and some of them put their hand up again for our asset plan bit going forward. And so I think it's going to be in those smaller sample groups rather than trying to do it across the entire municipality or anything next time. That's just a thought about because you get down to the services, you've got to trade off drains, and you've got to be able to get into a bit of detail of that. Is it maternal child health, or is it the local roads? You've got to, thanks.
And last question, so for each of you, everyone listening today, what's your one hint, tip, or thing to avoid, do you think, through the putting the financial plan together to not lose too much hair or turn too grey? If you get to sort of September, October and have it adopted, what's your one hint or tip to finish up? Over to you, Ross.
I was hoping you wouldn't come to me first.
Oh, you came up on my screen. You must have moved.
Oh, I must have. I think I'm probably still processing, exactly how I would do this next time, and purely because I'm still in the middle of it all. However, it would be more around try to look around exactly what you are trying. Don't try to be too detailed. Going past year 5 from that point of view, because who knows what's around the corner. And you've just got to be, if you're going to look at those outer years, you've just got to be reasonable in how you're predicting it will be, not absolutely down to the last dollar.
Yeah, agree. I don't think there's too many long-term financial plans had COVID factored in 5 years ago. So
right, exactly.
Nathan, your hint or tip or thing to avoid?
I'll go back to my little line, which is to plan to communicate that story behind the numbers. If you haven't kind of got a little bit of a narrative going for it, then do that. But the other thing is, this is the best part because it's an integrated strategic framework now. Others have to help you with your financial plan and the story behind it. It's integrated. It's in the act. So go and engage, get along and do it with the other council planning. But it's harder, but then it's easier because you're on the back of the other process as well, and that means that you're doing it as a bit of a team, and you're working together to kind of do that communication with councillors and the community. But plan to communicate that story.
No, thanks for that. You're saying we actually have to talk to the infrastructure manager?
They're a very important person, Bradley, and you know that you need to talk to them. But those engineers, very important. Yep.
Absolutely. Love our engineers. And Adam, over to you.
Sim, I'll probably keep it simple. So try not to make it overly complex. As I said, I like to talk cash with councillors, and you can talk cash with people that understand that and how that impacts and how we end up at the end of year 10. People understand that, and they can, everyone knows about that.
Well, thank you, Adam, Nathan and Ross. That's given, I think, a fair bit of great insight to how we're doing it. It's like anything, we'll give it a crack. We all agree we're not perfect and we'll make mistakes along the way, but hopefully some key learnings have come out of today's session for everybody. So appreciate your time and putting your faces up in the lights for a few moments today. So appreciate that.